Hi, hello, I'm Lucio Ribeiro. I'm a lecturer of digital marketing and artificial intelligence here at RMIT. I'm also the founder of consultancy Lucio.AI and Australia's first TikTok agency, Tick My Day. Today, I'm receiving Matt Bruty, solution architect at Digital Balance, and today we'll talk about martech and technology. All right? So before we start, I'd like to ask my participants, everybody here, to make sure you have your microphone mute, so Matt can speak clearly with us. So welcome, Matt. Where does this webinar find you?
Finds me enjoying the later stages, hopefully the later stages of lockdown in Melbourne, and also in a world of great change, not just in the outdoors world, but also in the industry that I work in. Yeah, there's quite a lot going on in all aspects of the world at the moment, especially around some of the topics we're going to be talking about today. And yeah, the kind of conversations that I end up having with people are going to be very similar to the kind of information that we're hopefully going to get to impart to the guys today.
Thanks, Matt. I know you've been in the industry for over a decade now. I also know that you have done projects for business like Australian Post, NAB, Bupa. But rather than me talking about yourself, how about you introduce yourself to the team here today? And then we talk about what we're going to be talking today. How about introduce yourself?
No problem. So I am Matt Bruty. I am a solution architect for digital consultancy called Digital Balance. We're a Melbourne-based digital consultancy that provides data analytics and optimization services to a whole range of enterprise businesses. Some of those that Lucio's just mentioned. Now, my role within the business is quite a fun one. Essentially, as solution architect, it's my job to piece together all of the bits of technology that most of our clients have or want to be using and make sure that they're using them efficiently and effectively, and also keeping my eyes on the horizon for what's changing in market. How is new technology coming along? How should that be integrated into what people already have? And more pertinently to today's conversation, what is changing fundamentally about the ways that people already use their technology, and how are they going to adapt to that to be able to survive into the future? Now, increasingly, those conversations are starting off around data governance, which is GDPR and some of the privacy directives that you might have heard of floating around, but also around data restrictions, which is what you physically can and can't do with data, and where you may have had access to it before and where the access might be disappearing either already or in the very near future. And that's going to be part of what we're going to go through today.
Perfect. Matt, I want to acknowledge one of the smartest brains in Australia, maybe in the world of marketing technology, my friend Paul McIntyre. Paul is a journalist, writer for Australian Financial Review, and now he's the head of MI3, the best publishing here. Paul, you want to say hi?
Lucio, you're well over. You've had wheat bix for breakfast.
And man, this is just 9:30, so very glad to have you here, Paul.
Thank you, Lucio. And just a heads up, I'm sorry, believe it or not, I've got to go into my own podcast in about 15 minutes, but I'm here and I'll catch up on everything else, but good to be here. Thanks for the wrap. I think it's a bit, you definitely get off the wheat bix, Lucio.
Perfect. So Matt, Paul has a read he published some time ago. It's about 3 months ago, Paul?
Which one, mate? Which one? I don't know.
The one, sorry, the digital cookie meltdown. They had a podcast.
Yeah, right. And I note today, by the way, and you might have some views on it, that Apple's reversed its policy at the moment on what it's going to do with iOS 14. So there's some big stuff happening, right?
Big stuff. So guys, we are in a great companionship with Paul McIntyre. Thank you for showing up, Paul.
Cheers, Lucio. Look forward to hearing some stuff here. Really good. Thank you.
Cheers, Paul.
And you're going to hear amazing stuff from Matt. Matt, today we'll talk about the digital cookie meltdown, what every marketer and agency should know, but doesn't think they need to know. For the context here, before I give you the full floor to you, Google has outlined a plan to limit tracking cookies on Chrome, same as Apple, Safari, and Firefox, And this carries immense implications for performance marketing, audience targeting, measurement, puts personalization strategies under review. This here, right now, with you, Matt, is the best 45 minutes a marketer can spend right now. Huge impact that's coming. Australia has they say about 9 billion online advertising sector, okay? But before we explain this huge impact of this cookie meltdown, how about, Matt, you take us into this journey from the past, the present, the future. You explain to us about the cookies in the past, the challenge we have now in the present, and then the future with CDPs, how cookie works. How about you take the floor and take us in this journey?
Absolutely. Okay, thanks, Lucio. So today's conversation, we're going to try and fill in a lot of the blanks that I especially see with a lot of people in the industry when it comes to the fundamental understanding of the role that a cookie plays in digital marketing. Now, in a lot of cases, there are many people in the industry who have simply had their entire careers from start to finish, where they've had access to vast amounts of data that have let them accurately do their job and conduct effective marketing without really needing to think too much about where that data comes from or how they're able to access it. But the changes that are happening in the industry at the moment essentially mean that the ground is shifting in such a significant way that it's really important for those same people to come back and understand the fundamentals, where the data comes from, how it's used, and what areas of it are no longer going to be available after the cookie apocalypse, the change to the impact of cookies. So I'm going to go through three main areas as we kind of go through some of the slides here today, which is starting off super basically, what is a cookie? Where did it come from? What was it originally designed for? Then we'll look at how they are commonly used in digital marketing. What happens if you try and take them away? And then we'll end up by looking at some of the bigger platforms which are used by businesses to make use of these on a grander scale, and how those are kind of evolving and changing for people to still be able to reach and market to their desired audiences when they don't necessarily have access to the same level of data that they had previously. So with that said, first up, how cookies work and why they are relevant. So this is going to be, as I say, a very, very low-level start to what a cookie is and how it works, and then we're just going to build up and look at the picture of where it fits in, what you might put in a cookie, where you can use it and where you can't. So at a base level, a cookie is just a way of storing information in a browser on a specific domain or a website. That's all it is. It's just a way of holding a small piece of information. Now, originally, cookies were designed to help websites remember things. Back in the day, back in the 90s, websites essentially had no memory. They had no way of remembering who someone was from one page to the next. Now, that's fine if you're just running a blog where someone reads one blog post and they move to the next blog post and there's not really too much else to be said. That's fine. But when it comes to e-commerce, you then start to run into a little bit more of a challenge, which is if someone comes to your website and they add something to their cart and then they move forward to the checkout page, that website needs to remember what they put in the cart, because otherwise they're going to move forward to the checkout page and the website's going to think it's empty. So a cookie fulfills that purpose, and that was the original purpose of a cookie. It was essentially to be able to say, if someone comes to Kogan and they click the add to cart button, there is a Kogan cookie that will store the details of what they added to the cart. When the user then moves across to the Kogan checkout page, that same cookie is available. Inside it are the details of the things that are in their cart, and that allows the website to function properly. That's the original purpose of a cookie, helping people remember things from one page to the next on a website. But cookies can store information from other websites, and it didn't take people very long to realize that you could use this ability to store information in a cookie to learn things about what people do on other websites. So for example, you could have a number of websites that are all operating the Facebook marketing technology, or a pixel. If you're actively in the industry, you might recognize it as the Facebook pixel. So Facebook will have its own cookie that is available on all of these websites. And critically, that cookie is going to contain an identifier, a unique identifier. Now, this is an area in which a lot of people get confused, especially when cookies and privacy is spoken about in the wider ecosystem, or the ecosystem in public to the general public. Cookies aren't storing names, they're not storing your email address, they're not storing your phone number. It's simply storing a random number that is totally unique, and there is no other cookie on earth that has the same value as this. So what that means is that every time Facebook sees this cookie, it's got the same value in it, and therefore it's very likely to be the same person. It doesn't immediately mean it's the same person, but it's incredibly likely that it's the same person. So here you can see a scenario of someone that will visit, say, Kogan, where Facebook is operating, and the Facebook cookie is able to store the information about the headphones that they looked at. They might then come to the RMIT website and look at details of a business course that can be stored into the cookie. And likewise, they could go to Coles and, you know, the details of your favorite lockdown snack, family-sized packet of Tim Tams, in my case, is the way that I'm dealing with the situation. And you can see that that's essentially built out quite a big picture of what I'm doing, what my interests are. So now Facebook is in a position that when I go to Facebook, and this is how the cookie value manifests itself. If I now visit the Facebook website, that cookie is there ready and waiting, and Facebook, when it gets an opportunity to put an advert in front of me, has now got a head start on what that advert might be, because it knows things about me, it knows what I'm interested in, therefore it's got a better chance. If it puts an advert about one of these things in front of me, there's a higher chance I'm going to engage with it, higher conversion rates, happy days for everybody involved. And that, in a nutshell, is the key role that cookies play in digital marketing. Hopefully that makes sense, and that idea of the ID here is very important. Now, the next stage that we get to is this idea of first and third party cookies. Now, this is another area that people often, we find, at least Digital Balance definitely finds this in the industry, people misinterpreting what this actually means. So things start to get interesting when people start talking about different types of cookies. And you've probably heard people talking about first-party cookies and third-party cookies and inferring that they are different things. Technically, that's a misconception. A cookie is just a cookie. What changes is which website you are on when you're looking at that cookie. It's about the perspective. So if a Facebook cookie is set to the user's browser, for example, in the center here, and it's got this ID inside it, if you then go to the Facebook website, from that perspective, this cookie is a first-party cookie because the cookie belongs to Facebook and you are on the Facebook website. That is what makes it first-party in this particular case. But if you were instead to go to the RMIT website, now in this context and from this perspective, it is a third-party cookie because the cookie belongs to Facebook, but you are on a different domain, a different website when you're looking at it. That's the fundamental difference. It is the same cookie, it's got the same value in it, but it depends where you are as to the perspective and the context of that cookie. So I hope that makes sense. And that's something that we find is a bit of an unknown quantity for a lot of people in the industry. They've just got used to having cookies and haven't really needed to worry about the difference between one or the other. But it's been an interesting journey over the last few months, especially as the impending loss of third-party cookies has arisen. We've discovered a lot of people that perhaps haven't quite understood the difference between the two, are looking at some of the different ways that browsers are trying to change access to these cookies and misunderstanding the impact. So a big part of the role that we play is actually quantifying the exact impact on businesses, where they are using their data. It's stored, how much of that is in a third-party cookie. Okay, if you don't have those anymore, what are you going to do? So let's now look at an example of that in terms of an example impact of a loss of third-party cookies. And for this, I'd like to, I'm going to run through 5 specific questions that will help you understand an exact marketing use case, where the cookie fits in, what you use it for, how and when you can access that information, and why that's important, and then what happens if you can't. And this, again, is another very important one for a lot of businesses to understand. Is losing a third-party cookie is definitely a very big thing for certain parts of the industry, but not for other parts. And it's understanding that balance that's really important for people to get correct in their heads in order to prioritize how they as a business are going to address this change. So first thing we're going to look at is what is the goal of retargeting. So we're going to use an example of retargeting to demonstrate how and where a cookie is used. So what is retargeting for anybody that's not familiar with it? So we have a scenario where somebody visits the RMIT website and views some content. Then that person will visit Facebook, and when they're on Facebook, they will be retargeted with some similar content. And that content is designed to get the user to re-engage and come back to RMIT. That is retargeting in a nutshell. Take something you know about what somebody did when they're on your website, put that same message in front of them when they are somewhere else in order to encourage them back onto your website. Now, I'm sure for some of you that will be really obvious. For others, perhaps it's not something that you've worked with directly before. There's actually an interesting point around having these kinds of conversations is because you have to start so low down in the fundamentals, there can often be a lot of people who are kind of sit and go, yeah, I already understand all of this, but it's really important to focus on the messaging all the way through here so that you can finally join the dots at the other end and truly understand the impact, especially if your boss decides to walk in and goes, if we don't have third-party cookies, what happens? The message that I'm going to put forward here is going to help you answer that. So I'm going to use an analogy around how all of this works and how cookies work and what the value is. And an analogy that I find that works really quite well is talking about sending a parcel. If you want to send something to somebody. So there's a few different bits of information that you need in order to do that. The first thing is that you need something to send. So in this scenario, we've got a lovely pair of sunglasses. That's great. We'll just stick them in the post box and they'll, you can't just stick them in the post box. You've got a little bit more work to do than that. There's a few more steps involved. They're never going to reach their destination just by that. So you're going to need a method of sending your parcel. So you're going to take your sunglasses, you're going to stick them inside a box or an envelope or whatever else. Great, happy days. You can now march down to Ozpost, stick that on the counter, and they'll ship it off for you and send it. Except you're still missing a piece of information because it may well be packaged up, that's fine, but it still needs somewhere to be sent to. It needs a destination. It needs something on it that allows Ozpost to link that parcel with the person that you want to send it to. So, as if anybody hadn't guessed that already, the thing that you need is an address to send it to. And it's that combination of those three things that allow you to get that parcel to its destination. And that's the really important part here. Those three things can directly map to the items that we need as part of digital marketing. So we have the item you want to send, which is, in this case, our RMIT content that we want to use for retargeting. We have the method that we are going to send it, which in this case is the internet. Anybody technical in the room knows there's a little bit more nuance to it than that, but for the purposes of this discussion, the internet is absolutely accurate. And then finally, we have, just as we need to provide the accurate address on the parcel for Ozpost so that that parcel can get to me in Melbourne, we need to provide Facebook, in our scenario for retargeting, we need to provide Facebook with some form of address or identifier so that they can take the information that you're sending them and connect it to me inside Facebook. And thankfully, as we saw earlier, Facebook provides just such a method in the form of a cookie. But what that also means is that that cookie is incredibly important. Without that address, without the ability to take your parcel, have a method to send it, such as the internet, and a cookie, which is the address that it needs to be sent to, there is not going to be a way to actually get that content in front of me over on Facebook. That's the central role here, is that cookie is absolutely critical in order for Facebook to be able to receive the parcel, in order to know that there's some RMIT content that is relevant to put in front of this person. So what does that mean in terms of changing landscape? Well, this section here is massively condensed down. So we do extensive workshops for a lot of our clients where we take them through specific details on a percent by percent basis for each browser they have and each data set they have, which ones use third-party cookies, how reliant are they, what is the impact going to be? And I can tell you just at a broad level, the impact is very significant. In a lot of cases, businesses that have built up data sets that they are using for marketing purposes could easily be looking at losing access to over 80% of those audiences once third-party cookies become unavailable. Now, Yeah, big number, right? Very, very big number, which is why this is such a big conversation to be had at the moment. Now, the reality of what's actually changing in the industry is that a lot of browsers are basically taking responsibility for governance, data governance and privacy around how data is used. There's basically been a massive explosion in the use of data over the last 15 to 20 years, around which a huge economy has been built. And wherever you have a huge economy, you have a huge amount of money, you're probably going to end up with, unfortunately, some people who are prepared to do whatever it takes to take advantage of that, which is where we have a situation of data being misused or not used with consent, et cetera, et cetera. Cambridge Analytica, all of those types of conversations are all part of this. What you're looking at here are the individual browsers' reactions to that, where they are trying to take back control and restrict how and when data is used. This is essentially the overall death of the third-party cookie. It's got many names. If you're talking about Apple and Safari, it's called ITP. In Firefox, it's called Enhanced Tracking Prevention. Microsoft has its own version. Their desire to prevent access to certain types of cookie data is essentially the death of the third-party cookie. And what they are doing in most cases is blocking access to cookies. So just to recap, recall the important aspect here. Let's just go back to what that third-party cookie is. That is, that if you are in a situation where you are trying to look at a cookie that belongs to somebody else's website, you would no longer be able to look inside that cookie. If you're on the RMIT website and you're trying to look at that Facebook cookie and third-party cookies are blocked, you can no longer look in that cookie. If you can't look in the cookie, you can't get the address. If you can't get the address, you cannot send the parcel. That's the crux of it. Without that address, without the ability to send the parcel, it's not going to get to its destination. You're not going to be able to conduct any kind of activity that relied on that address. So to break that down, and again, this is just for after reading purposes, if you have a third-party cookie, if they are allowed, then you can see what's in the cookie, then you can use the value that's in that cookie to get your information sent to the right place. But if the cookie is blocked, you can't look inside it, you can't get hold of that address, you can't send your parcel. Hopefully for at least some people in the room who've got experience with this, you can appreciate the gravity of that situation. And to just make it a little more real, this is the situation about which browsers are currently allowed third-party cookies. Now, there are lots of nuances to this. This is a very broad brush for the description, but it is true to the greatest extent, which is to say that as of today, third-party cookies are not available to you in Safari. They're not available to you if you're using Firefox. They're not available in Edge. They are currently allowed in Chrome. However, as you will be aware, Chrome has announced that in 2022, it's going to remove support for third-party cookies so that they will become blocked as well. So we will essentially be in a scenario where you will no longer have access to those third-party cookies, and there's going to be a lot of parcels piling up that are not going to get sent anywhere because you don't have that ability to post them.
Matt?
Yes.
May I interject one thing? So everybody's aware, Chrome currently has about 65 to 70% of browser market share, which is ridiculously big. It influences this directly. Direct questions, just because we are right here. Does that mean that Facebook Pixel would become irrelevant?
It means in its current form that it is ineffective. Now, Facebook has devised several other methods as ways to transfer this information. It's developed what's called server-side APIs, which is where you use a different type of a different method to send the parcel. So it doesn't use the internet as I've described it here. It goes via a different route where it may be possible to send a value. And there's definitely a lot of moves afoot in order to try and mitigate the impact of this. But yes, by and large, anything that relies on the traditional method of a third-party cookie, regardless of how big that company is or what their market cap is going to be equally affected by the loss of this, by the loss of access to a third-party cookie. It's yeah, it is significant. Now, as I often find on some of these talks, and in fact, that's a great example, a really great example about how fast things are moving at the moment. Paul mentioned at the top of the meeting that there's apparently an update to news from Apple that they are potentially, if I heard you correct, Paul, going back on their IDFA statement recently. Now, for anyone who's not familiar, cookies are what you use to track people inside web browsers. But if you're on a mobile device in an app, it has a different type of ID, a different address. Now, commonly in Apple devices, that is called the IDFA, which is the identifier for advertisers, which is essentially linked to your device. And every time you open an app, that same ID is available to the app. And in the same way that the cookie could figure out that you've been to Kogan and then RMIT and then to Kohl's, the IDFA plays that same role on the device. Now, Apple in its iOS 14 release had essentially said, we're not going to remove this ID, we're not going to block it, but what we are going to do is force developers to throw up a very specific modal in front of everybody when they open the app, saying, this app wants to track you across other websites. Will you allow that to happen? It's very specific wording. It's very directly designed to let people know what is happening on the device. But the net effect of that is that if you are shown a message that says this app wants to track you across websites, that kind of messaging is not likely to yield in a lot of people clicking, yes, I am happy to do this. So the net effect is that there could be a huge drop off in the number of people who will allow their IDFA, that identifier, to be used. Therefore, the ability to reach people and to retarget them between their activity on various different apps suffers the same kind of impact as we're looking at here with the third-party cookies. If you don't imagine here this cookie, if that said IDFA, if you didn't have it, you haven't got the address, you can't send the parcel. It's very similar impact. But where this is a great example is the industry is moving, these changes are coming along really quickly. So quickly, in fact, that as Paul mentioned at the start of the call today, Apple had made this big decision about IDFA and iOS 14, and now seems to have changed their mind and is going in a slightly different direction about it. Now, the impact, for example, of the IDFA change is so significant that it was, according to Facebook, due to impact their ability to reach audiences or to reduce the value in their audiences by as much as 50%. Facebook makes its money on marketing. It makes its money based on the value of the audiences that advertisers want to connect to. And this loss of the IDFA value, the inability to use that, is essentially going to impact Facebook's ability to generate revenue from those audiences by as much as 50%. I don't need to tell you how big those numbers are, but clearly they're going to impact somebody's bottom line quite a lot. So that's very interesting that changes could be going back in the other direction. And it's also a big part of my job. It's why it's such a big part of the role of digital balance at the moment as well, is to help businesses stay up to speed. These changes are happening so quickly that your standard marketing departments, they're already busy doing everything they can on a day-to-day basis. These technical changes under the hood are happening so quickly that they really need a lot of input from external businesses to keep up everything. So very interesting times indeed.
So Matt, is this the end, as we know, of remarketing on Facebook and Facebook properties, of course, Instagram and so forth?
It's not going to be the end of remarketing. There will be methods that will be devised to continue to allow this kind of activity to happen. There are some that already exist in terms of building profiles around first-party cookies. Now, we mentioned third-party cookies before. Those are, we now know that a cookie is a cookie, but it's the perspective that you look at it that changes how you can access it. But if you are able to build up and store data inside a first-party cookie and then use that for retargeting purposes, then you're in a much better shape. So there are businesses out there like LiveRamp and Axiom, especially prevalent in this region, that are very, very good about building up first-party data sets in order to allow you to continue to reach all of these people, i.e. they can keep passing you the address so that you can keep sending your parcels. But what this change is going to do is significantly shift the way that people go about retargeting. A whole bunch of other areas. I've chosen retargeting here just as a nice clear example about what kind of purpose the cookie serves. But its loss really does impact a lot of other areas. Now, I should state at this point that my role and what Digital Balance does is very much focused more on the on-site activity. So we are an analytics and a personalization and data management consultancy, which means we're very much concerned with helping businesses understand the data that comes to them while people are on their website, and then helping them improve the experience for customers while they're there to improve the chances of a conversion and a beneficial outcome. The use of the third-party cookie is obviously based a lot more on what happens when people are off your website. And that's a lot more of your programmatic and display and those kind of activities. And that's where a lot of retargeting sits. But because that world outside the website is essentially the biggest area that's being impacted by the loss of third-party cookies, the reaction of our clients is to start to focus much more on what happens on their website, to bring things back indoors and actually start going, okay, how can we make the most of what we have if we're no longer going to have access to all of this info in the wider landscape, so to speak.
Sorry, Matt, which is a return to your owned media and your properties, right? And I guess at this point in time, for us to be talking about remarketing being possible, the impact in programmatic and everything else, we need to go one step back and understand the difference between CRMs, DMPs, and CDPs, and what is the simple definitions where each one fits. Is that what we're going to listen from you now?
That's exactly where we're going. So that's a better way than I could ever hope to write. Thank you very much. Perfectly lined up. So with that focus of clients now shifting back into their own websites, their own data sets, and the realization that perhaps they may have been overly reliant on sets of data that they didn't truly understand, that were not their own, so buying in third-party data, brings people to sort of the present day and looking at CDPs. But let's have a quick whistle-stop tour through the history of these kind of platforms, just from a very high level, to help you understand what their place has been, and in some cases continues to be, within a marketing technology ecosystem. So originally, for the purposes of this story, we're going to start off in sort of the mid-80s, late 80s, when businesses had enterprise resource platforms that were designed to help them keep track of a lot of in-house resources. How many parts do I have in the warehouse? If this new order comes in, when do I need to order new bits and pieces? How much is it going to cost me, et cetera, et cetera. Very useful. As that kind of information started to be stored on computers, businesses realized it would also be quite good to be able to store information about their customers along the same lines. Who are my best customers? What do they often buy? What are their details? How can I help tie this all together to better serve the customer? That's essentially where a CRM, a customer relationship management platform, sprung from. It moved that focus of storing data from not just back of house, but to front of house, to cover more of the frontline engagement with customers and build up a better picture of who they are and what they're doing. Now, at that point, businesses started to realize that what they would actually like to do is, now they've built up a picture of who their current customers are, and they know what their good current customers look like, wouldn't it be great if there was a way for them to go out there into the market and find more people that look like that? That's where the role of the DMP comes in. So we moved through the 90s into the early 2000s at this point in time, which is essentially where a DMP has arrived as an opportunity for you to do prospecting, to find customers. So a DMP essentially lets you load in information about your customers and build a model about what your ideal customer looks like based on their buying habits and so on. Other businesses are also putting their data into a DMP as well. Just the buying habits and the traits about what a good customer looks like for them. DMPs are not storing email addresses or personal information at all. It's literally like, you know, a good customer for us buys this product once every month and they have this average spend, those kind of metrics. Now, since you're putting your data in the DMP, and some other businesses are probably putting information in there, it essentially gives you the opportunity to say, hey, look, this is what my ideal customer looks like. Does anybody else have customers that look like this? Because if you do, I really want to get in front of them. I would like to market to them. I will pay you for their address, for their cookie ID, so that I can send them a parcel, so that I can get my message in front of them. That is the central purpose of a DMP. It's to facilitate upper funnel prospecting to bring in new customers. It's to go out there and find people that look like your ideal customers, advertise to them, and get them back to the site, whether that be through retargeting, programmatic, whatever. There's a lot of channels there. Primarily, the big area that DMPs feed into is your DV360s and your display networks, because that's where you can just have a massive amount of reach. Now, all of that information, as you can imagine, if you're trying to find people via showing adverts on somebody else's website, and you've got a cookie, an address that you're trying to use to reach them on that website, if you think back to our analogy before, it's a cookie that is a third-party cookie, because you're on your website, but you're trying to use the cookie that's on somebody else's website in order to advertise to them. And that's primarily the way that DMPs allow you to connect out with people. The primary purpose of acquisition for a DMP is using third-party cookies in order to connect to new customers. Now we move on to a world where that's obviously no longer going to be as viable or lucrative as it has been in the past, and that's where a CDP comes in. Now, where a customer data platform differs is that it doesn't focus on upper funnel activity, which relies on all of these third-party cookies. It's therefore a lot less impacted by the loss of third-party cookies. A CDP focuses much more on first-party data and your own cookies, first-party cookies, which are still accessible and reliable and based on information that you know and own and control. So rather than accidentally discovering that you've purchased an inaccurate data set from somebody on a DMP, you're now working with your own data so that you can accurately retarget your customers much more effectively using your own channels, which we in fact see a couple of examples of those now. So just to put in place here the different roles that a DMP and a CDP play, and this is another one of the more interesting misconceptions that we're seeing at the moment as well. Yes, a CDP is a form of evolution of a DMP in as much as there is a decent amount of overlap in the functionality between the two, but they do play significantly different roles. That DMP is there to bring people onto the site. It's for your prospecting, it's for your acquisition. The CDP is much more focused around making the most of customers once you have them, nurturing and retargeting them based on a lot more accurate information that you own on your own website. It's also designed to allow you to connect out to as many different channels as possible. Whereas a DMP might traditionally be around display networks and just programmatic, the CDP is designed to let you connect your data out to anywhere. So we're going to have a look very quickly at a couple of examples of that, just so you can set the picture. And then eventually we'll end up at a diagram which essentially represents a vast majority of my time at the moment, which is where I spend a lot of time helping businesses understand what to do with their data. So just to give an idea around traditionally how data is used within a business, within a marketing organization, you will have most likely some form of data source, which you use to make a business decision, which you then activate in order to serve the purposes of a KPI. So an example of that could be you've got some data, which is some email addresses and the details of the products that are owned by the people that have those email addresses. The business decision is that you want to identify the next best offer to put in front of them. And then the activation point is sending a targeted email to that person using something like MailChimp. Likewise, you could have another use case where the data set that you have is come from your ad network that says, I've got some details here of some ads that I showed somebody. And that could be combined with information about what that same person did when they were on your website. And the business decision or the business focus is that you want to improve the site content, in which case you might activate that data via an analytics platform, which is to say, okay, let's analyze people that have seen these ads and interacted on the website in this way and see what we can do to change that experience in future. Oh, it looks like anybody that sees this ad 3 times has a higher chance of coming into the website and then leaving. Well, maybe the content in that ad is not accurate, or maybe we need to change the messaging on the landing page of the website to more accurately match the messaging that they're seeing in the advert off-site. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that kind of activity, but the important point here is that more often than not, this type of thing tends to operate in silos. You've got sort of the email marketing team here that's doing its own thing, and then you've got the analytics team here that's doing its own thing based on a different data set. This is where a CDP makes the difference. This is what a CDP is designed to do. A CDP is designed to allow you to take in data from any of your channels and any platform you can possibly think of, your call center, your CRM, email addresses, on-site activity, kiosks in stores, FPOS systems, any possible signal that you have can be ingested by a CDP, which means that when an individual marketing team or section of the business is trying to make a decision, it's now got available to it all of the possible information that it could need about that particular customer. Now, the CDP's main purpose in this sense is to help you stitch together all of these different signals to build a unified view of your customer. This is all based around first-party data, building up around identities and not cookies, and this is a key component of it. Where a DMP uses that cookie ID, which if we think back to what I mentioned about Facebook earlier, it's just a random ID and a cookie. It probably means that it's you because Facebook has seen it on all of the websites that you visited, but it doesn't definitely mean it's you, which does leave that area for ambiguity and lack of accuracy. CDP is based much more around profiles. It is tying this information back to an email address, a phone number, something that is very, very deterministic as opposed to probabilistic in its accuracy. Within the CDP, once you build those profiles, the next thing it does is allow you to analyze, curate, and build target audiences and figure out what kind of messaging those people should be receiving next. And that's where the final component of the data activation side of things comes in. You use the CDP to figure out everything you can about someone, you build that profile about them, you figure out when it's appropriate to be putting a new message in front of them, and the data activation component of the CDP then allows you to connect out to any channel or method that you would like in order to message that person. And just as a final point here, just to be clear, and this is quite an interesting one that we see in the industry as well, the CDP is not the thing that sends the email in this particular case. It's not sending text messages or whatever else. The CDP is simply providing the signal and the information that says, hey, email platform, you need to send this message to this person. Now MailChimp, do your thing, and that will set up and run the rest of it. But hopefully you can see how the CDP is really this big focus on centralizing all of your data, and really the key focus is to make it available to marketing teams to use and make decisions as easily as possible. Now, where I spend the vast majority of my time within the business is much more in this upfront section. So I'm sure some of you will have heard the great stories of a CDP and consolidating data in the past. It's like, yeah, that's great, but I've got data that's dusty. The bloke that owned it left 5 years ago. I've got some obtuse email platform. I've got some scraps of paper on my desk. How the hell am I supposed to get all of that in the CDP? That is still a very big challenge, and that is the main focus for a lot of businesses right now, is focusing on this upfront area. How are we going to bring that data together? How are we going to connect it? And how are we going to bring it into the CDP in a way that allows the CDP to do its thing, build messaging and contact my customers? And that's a big part of the work that we do at Digital Balance at the moment. There is a huge recognition within the industry and for our clients that they want to move towards using a CDP to have the ability to connect with people directly on all of these channels, using all of the information that is available to them. But this part up front here is a very big challenge, and that's essentially what we spend a lot of our time working on at the moment.
So Matt, just a second. This is by far one of the best explanations I heard in my life on CDPs, on customer data platforms. So congratulations, really good. Very easy to understand, very easy to get through the different functions. So just for the benefit of the audience, CDP, customer data platform, which Matt just explained. Matt, can you give us some examples of some enterprise and medium-sized level CDPs like Salesforce or Adobe Experience? Just a few names so our audience just get their heads around.
I can, and I'd also like to point out at this point that Lucio hasn't seen the final slides on this presentation, so the fact that I get to do this makes us look very well prepared. Here we go. So, notable examples of some CDPs. Yes, there are an interesting spread, and they come in lots of different flavors. Now, if we think back to the CDP diagram I was looking at previously, and in fact I'm go back to it because this is important before I talk about specific platforms. You've got, within the CDP, there's three main areas. There's getting your data in, there's figuring out what you want to do with it, and then there's activating it, doing something useful with it. The different types of CDP and market have strengths and weaknesses in different areas. They have different focuses. Now, some CDPs have been built from the ground up to handle as much all of these areas as possible. And in our experience, the biggest challenge really is this first section, is cleaning up your data and bringing it in. So some CDPs really focus on that first area, giving you as much control, flexibility, options to bring in data, which means file formats and connecting to different kinds of databases and letting you batch stuff in overnight or stream it in real time. Getting a little technical there for the purposes of today's conversation, I appreciate, but those are really the things that can make a big difference. There are other CDPs that are much more focused on the middle area and the right-hand side here, which is letting you build and compile your audiences and make the right decisions about them and combining that data and then activating it and pushing it out at the other end. There's also a third type of CDP, which is essentially a type of platform that probably was something else previously, but has had extra functionality and features bolted onto it so that it now resembles the same level of functionality as a CDP. So those are the different kind of flavors, and what works for you will very much depend on who you are as a business. So for example, the main ones that we have here, we have, let's start with Telium Audience String, for example. That's probably one that'll be familiar to quite a few people, and which has got a head start or is in a good spot in the sense that Telium was originally a tag management company, which means that its technology is probably already on a lot of businesses' websites, allowing them to run their marketing technology, which makes the connection of all of those online data sources into their CDP really seamless, really works nicely. That time to get the data in is really low. So that's one of the biggest strengths there. We have mParticle, which is a from the ground up CDP. In my opinion, it's much more based around the focus of it recognizes your data is probably all over the place. So it gives you a lot of tools to make sure that you can handle it. It also pays a lot of attention, and I know I haven't spoken much about data privacy today, but that is a whole other conversation. But a very big part, as we saw about the loss of third-party cookies, is people have been potentially misusing what's in those third-party cookies. So the browsers have basically slapping the back of marketers' hands saying, you can't have this anymore. Where mParticle helps address that is that it recognizes that people's data is very sensitive, and it provides a huge array of tools to make sure that you can control how and where that data is used in order to make sure that if you take data into your CDP, when you use it, you are only using it in scenarios that the person has given consent for, which is a really important one, because if you find yourself on the wrong side of GDPR directive, that's going to cost you quite a lot of money. So that's a big strength of mParticle. Segment, likewise, has a good focus on allowing you to send data into its platform from wherever you need in order to combine things together. And then Adobe Experience Platform. Now, this is an interesting one. Adobe Experience Platform is actually a much more powerful and broader platform than just a CDP. It is essentially a bunch of building blocks that allow you to put them together in different combinations to produce marketing technology to suit your needs. Now, in one particular combination, it can be a real-time CDP, which offers many different options for bringing in your data, great ability to analyze and run data science on that information once it's inside the platform, and a whole host of out-of-the-box connectors to link that data up to your destinations in terms of connecting it to your email platform, to your SMS platform, back into your analytics, whatever that might be. But as a whole, that platform is got considerably more features to it. And it's essentially the way that Adobe positions Experience Platform overall is if you wanted to, you could take components of the Experience Platform and use them to build technically a rival to some of Adobe's other products and run it on the Adobe platform. So it's very much like a building blocks, a Lego kit in that sense. The trade-off there, to kind of go back around these four examples, the Telium setup, very easy to get into straight away. You need to make sure that you're paying attention to your data governance and your controls overall. mParticle, very good at getting data onboarded and provides those privacy controls for you. Segment allows you to bring in a lot of data and send it to a lot of places. Adobe Experience Platform probably has a lot more power and potential to it, but the trade-off there is that you do need a lot more upfront investment in terms of technical time taken. So you're going to need proper engineering and developer support to bring some of those data sets together in the early stages. But then once that data is inside the ecosystem, it is so structured and it has been placed there with such rigor that it becomes very easy to use and scale and continue to add to over time. So that might be one that larger enterprises tend to look at more than the others. And with that said, that essentially brings me to the end of the information that I have for today. Might just take a second to pop back and see what kind of questions we've got here.
Yeah, Matt, about 5 minutes and 4 questions, and then I wanted to allow some time for goodbyes, and then normally at the end of these sessions I ask you to ask one thing for the audience. So you have about a few minutes to think about what you want to ask the audience to do. Is connect to your LinkedIn or to visit you or whatever you want. But I have 4 questions. So we got to be about 30 seconds each one. First question, how does this change impact programmatic advertising?
So I'll preface this with saying programmatic advertising is not my area of expertise, but that said, it will be significant in terms of the accuracy of being able to get in front of the right audiences. You'll still be able to put adverts out there. It's just that address that you need to make sure you're sending your advert to exactly the right person is not going to be as readily available, which is going to see probably a big decrease in the accuracy. Also, third-party cookies from a programmatic point of view play a role in frequency capping, which basically means that you need to make sure you're not spamming someone with the same advert over and over again. If you can't keep count of that inside a third-party cookie, you may end up continuously throwing the same advert at someone, which might have a negative brand impact.
So another question from the audience. These are questions from the audience, Matt. I've been collecting throughout this webinar. Is personalization. Is that under risk?
So depends where you're trying to do the personalization. So on-site personalization, no, because that is your data. It's first-party cookies, and that's a big part of where a CDP will help with that. But personalization platforms that are running on your website that are tied back to first-party cookies on your website, not going to be affected. You can still take signals and data that come in from the outside world to augment and update information. So if somebody views an advert, they click through it, they come to your website, hopefully they've come through with some form of campaign tracking code. If you don't know what those are, that is definitely one of the things I would like people to come and ask me about after the fact, because that's a big part of helping people improve the set of data they have on site. But in terms of off-site personalization, for the traditional methods which have been used to do personalization, yes, it is going to impact that. Are there other options out there available? Yes. Really, the entire industry is kind of in a situation right now where it's still trying to figure out how it's going to react to all of this. So another whole conversation in and of itself is, at the same time as Chrome removing third-party cookies, they're also building a new set of functionality, a set of APIs that will still allow you to conduct, or prospectively allow you to conduct retargeting. The reality of those right now is that those are just plans. They are not they are not features, it's not functionality, it's not something you can reach out and touch and use. They are still planning how to build them. And I listened to a podcast the other day from Jerry Deichler at Google, VP of Ads at Google, who's basically said, we are not going to remove the third-party cookie until we have some way of replacing some of that functionality. So they're very much aware of the issues it's going to cause. So a big part of everyone's responsibility right now is pay attention to what the browsers are doing and how they're going to let you continue to get some form of functionality out of the things that you want to do. If it is not the third-party cookie, is it going to be something else? And just keep an eye on that.
So because you mentioned Google here, Matt, is this change a revolution set to strengthen Google's advertised dominance anyway?
The reality of that is that because so many people visit Google in a first-party context, you're going to go to the Google website, you're going to go to YouTube, whatever else. It probably leaves them a lot less impacted than other businesses because they're still able to pick up all of that information. They're going to get your search queries. They're going to figure out what YouTube content that you're looking at, which still gives them a bigger first-party data set to work with and allow them to continue to be more accurate and targeted. For situations where Google, maybe if you're using, and again, programmatic is not my strong point, but in a scenario where you were using Google to show ads on somebody else's website, yes, in that scenario, it probably would have been using a third-party cookie to figure out something about you. If you can't access the cookie anymore, the accuracy of the ad that gets shown is probably going to be decreased.
Cool. Matt, part of the audience here, I can see some really familiar names here. I have some really senior marketeers here. Rachel, talk about you. So an example is Rachel here, dear friend of mine, one of the best brains in marketing, a corporate marketer, former CMO, former marketing director for very large enterprises. And the question I always get across this level of seniority of marketers are, what do I learn? Where do I even start? Like, what level of literacy do I get across martech, adtech, data? The work you do, Matt, is very complex. And I always advise my friends, CMOs and marketers, to get external support from companies and people, experts like you, because then it really sets the tone and sets the frameworks and the way to do. But coming back to the original question, if any senior marketer, CMO, or marketing director wants to get literacy across adtech, martech, where do they even start? How do they go?
That is a good question. So in terms of literacy, it's just that interesting scenario, isn't it, of people that have potentially been using this technology for a long time and have not recognized the reality of how it works or how to plug it together. And those are some of the conversations that we help a lot of our clients with at the moment. We've got about 3 to 4 different CDP-based conversations at the moment, and all of those have come about through education sessions that we've been doing with our clients to help them understand how their data plugs together. And obviously, that's a big part of my world, is drawing diagrams in PowerPoint that help people understand where the data comes from or where it goes to, and then helping people recognize that they're going to need to then dive into the reality of the skill sets that they have within their business. That's always going to be a first one, is understanding of the lay of the land internally, getting a complete map of your third-party data, where it's being used, what it's being used for, can you trust where you got it from, then using that to drive as much as possible additional traffic onto your website to start building out your own first-party data sets, and use that process to actually figure out how you're using your technology at the same time, because what that allows you to do is accelerate your understanding of your existing setup whilst also providing you the kind of information that you need to stay successful in a world where you no longer have the kind of reach that third-party cookies have previously provided you.
So Matt, we really squeezing time here. There's so many questions. This has been phenomenal. So this presentation is going to make, I'm making this presentation available to my RMIT students and postgraduates here as well. The Marketing Academy, Advertising Week, and MI3, huge number of different seniorities and different level of people. So as I do with my guests, and you've been amazing. You've been, hopefully the coordinators of my course on RMIT don't see you speaking, so I don't lose my job for you. But having said that, thank you very much. I'd like you, please ask something for my audience. Them to connect to you on LinkedIn, like them to visit a website. What would you like our audience to return back the favor that you make to all of us today?
Thank you very much, Lucio. That's very, very good of you to say. Look, I'd like to ask people to have a think about where their current reliance on third-party data is, in order to figure out what direction you need to move to, in order to then start having the conversation around how you're going to prepare your business for a world that doesn't have access to this. So come and have a conversation with me. I'm Matt at digitalbalance.com.au, nice and simple to find. Come and take a look at our website as well. We do a lot of this CDP building and strategy work. We start at the very high level from the education piece. We move through into making recommendations about the kinds of technology. And then we really start to get to one of the, it's kind of the elephant in the room about moving forwards with something like a CDP, which is that onboarding of the data phase, that big piece of work that requires a lot of technical focus, working with a lot of your frontline people. So come and find us, have a chat. More than happy to help.
All right, thank you, Matt. That's been so educative and really interesting. The level of different people participating today. I'm getting a lot of thank yous here on the chat. So people can find Matt Bruty on LinkedIn. Also visit his website. These recordings are available. I'll chat to Matt about the presentation being available as well. So thank you very much for all of you who have participated, and I hope you'll be safe, and thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys.